All right, Daisy, you think we should start this? We'll have fun.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Guides 2020. My name is Christine Lee, and I'm here to talk a little bit about my story with Strala and how it has helped me confront the fears in my life. Now, my talk is called Breath and the Bees. So, what does yoga have to do with beekeeping? And I'll expand a little bit more in a moment. That's the title page right there. And before I begin, I want to talk about my Strala Meet Cute. Like, how did it all begin? And this here is a picture of Strala Studio in Manhattan. And I took a picture one day before class began. So I really wanted to capture that space. And I used to be the person who said, I fucking hate yoga whenever people recommended yoga to me. And believe me, people have been recommending yoga to me for years. I used to live in Berkeley at the time, and so it came up all the time. But there I was at Strala in 2010, questioning my long-held stance. And so I was there in a vulnerable state of fear, vulnerable to the fact that I might be wrong and vulnerable to what might happen. And like so many other people, I've suffered setbacks in my life. And the most public setback is a stroke that I had at the age of 33 that left me with a 15-minute short-term memory. And it was like being Dory the fish in Finding Nemo. And it was a few years after this that I ran into Strala and Tara Stiles. I was living in New York City, and I wanted a non-judgmental space in which to explore. And I had no expectations, only a bunch of fear. And like I said, I was afraid of being wrong, but I also wanted to be right. And I was a perfectionist, so I wondered whether I would be doing yoga right. I was out of shape, which put that doing it right at major risk. So I wondered if I'd be able to do anything at all and if my body would be shamed. I had no history of success with regards to physical sports and activity, so I wondered what I actually expected failure, and I wondered what failure would look like in yoga. I also feared the woo-woo aspect of yoga and its culture. I didn't want to chant. I didn't want to say anything in a foreign language that I didn't know the meaning of. And I was already marginalized and didn't want to feel further marginalized or marginalize others via appropriation. And that was the state of my mind as I entered Strala. So I went into the studio with a friend who was also a little hesitant, and we both felt tentative. But there was Tara, joking and being honestly a total goofball, not being pious at all. And so I thought, okay, so far so good. And I tried to disappear. Like so many first timers, I set the mat up in a place I hoped would be least obvious. As you can see from this picture, it's towards the back of the classroom. Not at the front, not at the back, somewhere in the back of the middle. And because I remember watching Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom and watching things like packs of antelopes. And I remember my father telling me, watch the antelope, watch which ones get eaten. And so don't be at the back, don't be at the sides. And sometimes the front isn't very good either because there's a trap and you might not want to be at the front of that. So be somewhere in the middle. So I was there at Strala, literally in a place of fear. But as you can see, it felt like an opening. After my stroke, Strala put me back on the road to wellness. I'd survived my stroke and had regained my memory, but I still didn't feel totally healed. I'd become a new person and was not used to this new world, my new body, my new mind, and I'd become an introvert. And I was exhausted by social interaction because my brain just couldn't process it like it had before. And I was at a loss for how to navigate the new me. And here I was in class. But then there was Tara. Soften, she said. Bend your knees, rock back and forth. And I told myself, don't go rigid. Truly feel what it is you're about to do. Now, in that first class, I found downward dog challenging. I was wearing a t-shirt and I remember it flapping over my head. And I'd never gravitated towards form-fitting t-shirts or form-fitting tops before, but I suddenly found that they had a reason to exist. And after class, I felt exhilarated. I didn't feel defeated at all. So I went to another class after that. And I made sure to go slow and steady, because slow and steady, I thought, would get me there. And in the past, I'd gone hard and fast in the beginning and knew that that would lead to burnout. So I conserved my energy. And if some of you are already familiar with Strala, you'll understand that these are the tenets of Strala, which I'll expand upon. And I also bought form-fitting tops. So my fear of form-fitting tops is gone. And as I've stated already, these are some of the tenets of Strala Yoga: to soften, slow down, to breathe, move with ease, conserve energy, and play. And these are some of the things that have guided me towards confronting fear and beekeeping. So the first principle or idea or concept that I want to talk about is soften. And we're going to talk a little bit about accepting the unknown and facing fears with softness. So this picture is probably driving some of you nuts. It's a blurry photo. So you're like, what? I'm telling you to open your mind. It's like opening a hive for me and lifting that top cover and being open to what may come. And you don't know what you'll see. You aren't focused on focusing. You might be trying to focus right now, but let yourself accept the blur. Check in with yourself, and this is softening. And I ask you to do that as you listen to this talk as well. So now we finally come to the bees. And people are like, bees? I keep bees. When I moved away from New York, I decided to do everything I couldn't do in New York because I miss New York so badly, and I still do. And one of the things I did was get bees and start an urban farm. And I also did the things that I was not allowed to do while I was married, and I got a divorce not very quickly after I had my child, so that I could also transform my divorce as freedom. At the time I got these bees, I was feeling a lot of fear. And here's the thing: bees can smell fear, and they will react to fear. They literally have an alarm pheromone they produce when they feel that they're under attack, and it smells like bananas. And I would further come to learn that the principles of Strala and the principles of beekeeping aren't all that different. And I would learn that these principles would save my life and help me overcome fear. And before we talk a little bit more about bees, I have an exercise for you. So as you've softened and opened your mind to the possibilities of things, the possibilities of this talk, I want to ask you about what intimidates you. And that's another form of fear, right? So you could literally have this question be, what scares you? But it can also be what intimidates you. And it's about connecting the things in your life that have nothing to do with yoga to yoga. And I'm just going to talk as you may be brainstorming about what intimidates you in life. Because what does bees symbolize for me? Because we're talking about bees also as a metaphor. And, you know, what words come to my head when I think of bees? And I've always loved bees, but I also equated them with stings and anger. But the reality is that bees only sting when they're trying to protect themselves. They're not angry so much as that they're defensive. It's all perspective. We're intimidating them. And bees are teaching me all about fear. And Strala has given me the framework to manage my fears. I didn't go into beekeeping to be a baller, like, to take pictures of myself, like covered in bees head to toe. I knew I'd be humbled and I knew I'd be softened. And I had to soften before I began beekeeping. You don't rush into it. You don't rush into fear. You consider and soften yourself before fear. And for me, it means taking classes. It means literally before opening a hive to soften my body. But overcoming fear also brings you honey and knowledge. And so beekeeping is a metaphor of my fears. The reality is I have ophidiophobia. I have a fear of snakes, and I'm not talking about that. So, there are irrational fears. We're not talking about irrational fears. I'm talking about the fear of doing what you've always wanted to do, but thought you couldn't, and the rules that you make up for yourself, which tell you that you cannot. So hopefully you have an idea of what intimidates you by now. So as I've said, the first time I received a hive, I remember standing and softening my body from my toes to my fingers before lifting the lid because they're afraid of me. They've been traumatized for millennia by bears. And in fact, bees and bears have just been had an adversarial relationship since pretty much the beginning of bees. So you've got to move smoothly, softly, not roughly at all, not like a bear, and you have to face your fears with softness. And this is a picture of some of my hives in my backyard. Which segues into the next principle, which is to slow down. In our society, slow is sometimes a pejorative term, like, oh, you're slow. But slow is not bad. And moving slow and steady, just like the tortoise, can bring you some major insights. Like my favorite pose, and people talk about this all the time. I like pigeon pose a lot. My favorite pose is corpse pose. And when I close my eyes, this is what I see. This is the ceiling of Strala, and I see it in my head even to this day. And even the fast poses, like everything can, a lot of things are beneficial when slowed down. And when I close my eyes, when I slow down, I think of something wonderful and still. And one of those wonderful things is the ceiling of Strala. So you've got to move slow and steady, because when you have fear, you've got to realize that there's fear all around. And you've got to move slow and steady. And the breath-body connection is the way the mind and the body connect, at least to me. Like inspecting is best done slowly, not in a rush. No one's going through a hive like this. And to examine and ensure the well-being of your bees and how safe they are and how well they're doing, and if there are enough baby bees or if the queen is still alive. You can only tell if you do it slowly and scan slowly. And yes, that's a picture of me going into my hive. And then there's the idea, the concept of breathing. So breathing is an involuntary act. I mean, even when we don't think about it, we're breathing. And that's the brain. That's our brain making sure that we're breathing. But breathing is also intentional. Like that's something we can purposely do, like to make sure that we are, taking deeper breaths and being mindful as we breathe. And that's the mind. And breathing slowly and steady helps with beekeeping and fear. Now, here's a horrible picture. This is a picture of me, and it's a picture of me with bee sting. You could see the bee sting on my forehead, and by the second day, it had traveled through my face, and now I look like somebody from Avatar. Um, and sometimes our fears are realized. That's the reality. You know, I get stung. I get stung pretty often, about every 1 month or two. I've been stung when an Amber alert went off with my cell phone in my pocket, and then the bees that were just hanging out on my leg stung simultaneously when they were stunned by the buzz. I've been stung by several bees at a time who attacked my ankles because I was wearing wool socks. And bees don't like wool socks because they remind them of bears. But this is the worst scenario. This was when I got stung on my face. Um, and I didn't happen to be wearing a veil or protection. And but here's the thing, I still keep bees, even though I faced a fear with being stung on my face. Because you got to move through fear, right? You got to breathe through fear. And this is me with ice on my face. Um, Again, like I said, breathing is intentional and it gets you through pain and discomfort. You know, that's why breathing is such a big part of Lamaze classes for childbirth, and 'cause it can clear that discomfort. I've breathed through my panic attacks when my husband of 18 years left me. And I breathed through the discomfort of my bee sting with ice packs on my face because it passes. And ultimately, you can hold fear. You can literally hold it in your hands and be with it and have it be with you with slow and steady breathing. I do sometimes go into hives without gloves. I know certain hives are gentler. And in fact, I prefer to be without gloves if that hive is gentle because I can feel the hive better and pretty much communicate with the bees better that way. And I'm way more gentler without these really thick leather gloves. And it sensitizes me. But it took me a few years to get to that point so that I could move without alarming them with that slow steadiness and breathing and softening, and for me to not be scared of them. And so beekeeping in a sense is like yoga, and confronting our fears or managing our fears is informed by yoga. And all of that has been healing to me and kept me centered and focused. So, you know, bees like yoga. And we have to move with ease. You've got to move like you love yourself. And this is something I heard a lot in class from Tara. And that line struck me because I wasn't sure I did move like I loved myself, because perhaps I didn't love my body and myself, in a sincere way. You know, because my mind and body were separate entities for most of my life until I had my stroke and I lost my brain function, a part of my body. And then I really missed it. I began to understand what it was it did, because you don't know what something does until it's gone. And I tried very hard to get my brain function back. And what I found was that the connecting factor is breathing, which connects the mind and body for me. And breathing is the thing that feeds the body, and the brain is in charge of an involuntary action, but in terms of breathing, but the mind is in charge of conscious breathing. You know, I'd had a stroke due to a hole in my heart that allowed a clot to slip through into my left thalamus without, from the through my heart without being filtered. Um, And my breath, it turns out, was not effective because of that hole and the fact that my blood was not being fully oxygenated. And now that the hole was closed, my breathing was working and I was no longer lightheaded. And I and I happened to be at Strala when I was starting to really realize and appreciate what my body did. And so I finally began to appreciate my body. So, my body was something that I was also scared of. And truly, for the first time, I began to move like I love myself. And I began to move with ease and realize that was a possibility and a reality, and appreciate my body, whatever size and shape it was. And, lead from your middle, not lurch like you're beekeeping, you can't lurch. You have to be balanced and making sure that you're not moving with rigidity, and to ensure slow and steady movement with ease. And you have to conserve energy, like rest. In a hive, there's something called winter bees. So in the winter, there are different, especially in places that get super cold, there's a different population of bees that see the hive through the winter. And it's really great to see that, like, after being busy gathering nectar all year, that my bees are taking some sort of rest. And then there's this balance between rest and effort. Rest is super important. It's how your body regenerates. I learned that after my stroke, in that I slept so long because my body was regenerating. And in the face of fear, we can't always be on alert. We do have to rest. And you also have to let your bees rest in the winter, because the bees have worked throughout spring and summer to bring in enough nectar and pollen to make it through seasons without available nectar. And it's why you don't harvest every single frame of honey out of a hive. You leave some behind for the bees to eat, because that's them conserving energy too. And it's the same for us. We have to rest so we have enough for later. And, this is part of being kind to yourself. And then again, as I said, corpse pose is my favorite pose. And I love that yoga gives rest value enough to have a pose for that very purpose. And then there's play. Some of us forget about this. Rest and play. And my main point here is that play overcomes fear. Bees work themselves to death, literally. In the winter, the worker bees live close to 6 months long, because they're not out flying and doing all the work. They're staying in the hive and keeping things warm. But in the summertime, worker bees live about 180 days, which is 6 weeks, because they're flying and going and being so busy that they just basically live a very short time. They spend all their energy in a very short amount of time. So play is essential. It's essential to joy. And the fact that I know this about bees remind me to rest and play. Oh, and before we move on to overcoming fear, we're learning the world, we're learning our bodies and our mind, and we cannot follow stringent rules. And on the other side of the door may be a world that is completely different when we go through it, when we work through our fear, when we breathe through our fear, rest through our fear, slow down and soften in front of fear. So play is the thing that gets us through our fear too. When I write, as I'm a writer, I read the work of others often, because it's like one of the most important things you can do as a writer is read. And this is the principle of workshop too, is to learn to play with the words of others, because it's easier to play with the words of others than it is our own. Our own stuff is just fraught with fear and vulnerability. But the whole goal is to learn to play with our own work through playing with the words of others, so we can then innovate and and then kind of have fun while doing it too, and equate and transform that fear into fun. So we're making new space in that way, and making our own rules and exploring new spaces, and to breathe into tension according to Tara, and then the breath scatters it. And here we are at overcoming fear. So I want to talk a little bit about going toward the roar. So lions hunt in a particular way. They line up. The lionesses line up on one side, and the lions line up on the other. And the lions roar at the prey. Let's talk about like a herd of antelope or whatever. And the prey run away from the roar where the lions are. But on the other side are these lionesses, and that's what they're running towards, these silent lionesses. And it's actually the lionesses who kill. So the moral of the story is to sometimes go toward the roar, which is the thing you fear the most, and to slow down and avoid panic. Basically, transforming things that intimidate us into joy, and this is sort of what's happening here, right? I was afraid of yoga and I disguised it as hatred. And I was afraid to keep bees because I thought it would be too hard, and I wasn't sure how many times I'd be stung. But both have given me a huge amount of joy and happiness, because they've helped me move through fear and given me a framework for confronting fear. And when I confront fear, I have access to brand new spaces. It's just to expand our world and to go beyond our comfort zone. So go toward the roar. And maybe like this picture has been shown before. It was just a blurry version earlier on. So softness, mindfulness, and ease will give you a way. If you accept the blurriness, everything else will come into focus. And this is that very picture that was out of focus earlier. And you get where you want to be because your interior world is your playground. And I hope this talk has helped you. I've received so many gifts from Tara and from Tara and Strala Yoga, and I'm just so happy to pay it forward and to offer my insights. And let me know if you have any questions and answers. And I'm infinitely contactable. I'm on Twitter where I'm XTINEHLEE. Thank you so much.